name's Chris. I'm going to be talking about what I've been doing with evaluating Ralph loops and looking at token efficiency. So what we can do is we can take Claude Code and run it in a loop, and we can have some different variations of that loop, and we can evaluate that on the same task to determine how efficient it is at creating tokens. So in this case, we were working on a document database written in Python. I also used the Shelly Testbench to help organize all these configurations and the test scaffolding, and then to retrieve those results. So you might be asking, what is a Ralph loop? If you're not familiar, it's essentially calling Claude Code as a command in, say, like a bash script, and then having it iterate through a different set of requirements as well as tracking its own progress. So you give it the agency to just read from your requirements document, maybe set example like prd.md, and then track that progress and say at progress.md. So you can either run for a predetermined number of iterations, you can have it exit after set signal is emitted, etc. So then, what is Shelly Testbench? So that's a command line tool that you can use to help set up those evals on the Claude Code config. So essentially, you'll define your config in a harness folder, which will contain your settings.json, any hooks, scripts, files you need, and then that gets combined with a repo, which will contain whatever data you want Claude Code to work with and you want to evaluate against. So in my case, you would have, say, a harness with your sandboxing settings, with your with any hooks that need to react to, say, a session start or a file edit, and then you have the repo that contains the PRD for the document database and any other predefined data that would be at the start of the evaluation run. You can take a look at the results. Plain Ralph ended up being the best in terms of input tokens. Caveman Ralph actually was best in terms of output tokens and was about 100,000 tokens more on input, which is actually pretty good considering that there was quite a lot of content in the skill that did not get used here. So if we trimmed down that skill a little bit, we can probably get the input tokens down. We also had this PRD query approach where we essentially run a retrieval hook to retrieve the next user story for Claude before the agent does any searching, reading, etc. The problem we ran into with this actually was that Claude didn't really trust it, so it would then aggressively use search tools that sort of drove that token usage up quite a bit. You can look at the tool called behavior, and that supports that. So when you see plain Ralph down here, only it didn't use any grep or glob commands. You have context Ralph and PRD query, both using these commands, as well as just having more bash tokens being used, more reads being done, etc. Caveman Ralph pretty similar in terms of token usage as well. Compared to plain Ralph. Context Ralph essentially was a way of telling your Ralph iteration to exit once it reached a certain context threshold. Didn't really shine here because this was such a simple task. Essentially all of these harnesses got 100% on the unit tests in the repo, meaning that it wasn't, again, not a very complex task. But what context Ralph would shine is if you want to make sure no matter what, your agent does not go over a certain threshold of tokens, say in one given iteration. So if you say hits 45,000 tokens, you can tell it to exit, summarize and exit, and then move on to the next iteration. So what we're going to work on in the future is some more prompt skills and agent setups to get more drastic changes. And hopefully positive changes. For example, we can try using the system prompt instead of the user prompt. We also want to try some knowledge graphs, see how that impacts agent behavior and token usage, see if Claude Code trusts it, see if there's other changes we can make, and then also evaluate more based on quality on some more complex repos and tasks. That's all I had to share with you. I have a more in-depth blog post on my website, shellysys.com. So I'll put that link in the description. If you want to get more information about agentic coding, spec-driven development, workflows, etc., I really recommend you subscribe. Thanks for watching.